Imagine a city larger and richer than any in Europe. A shining capital built over water, home to hundreds of thousands of peoples. An empire feared across an entire continent. And yet, this mighty civilization would fall to just a few hundred foreign soldiers who arrived from across the ocean. How did one of the greatest cities in history disappear? This is the story of the fall of the Aztec Empire and the destruction of the City of Gold. Part 1. The City of Gold, the Aztec Empire, and the arrival of the Spanish. Long before Europeans arrived, the Valley of Mexico was home to powerful civilizations. For centuries, peoples rose and fell, leaving behind temples, cities, and traditions. Then, around the 14th century, a migrating warrior people known as the Mexica, later called the Aztecs, changed the region's history forever. They were once nomads, moving from place to place in search of a homeland. According to their priests, the gods promised they would find their destiny where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a serpent. After years of wandering, they found this sign on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. There, in 1325, they founded Tenochtitlan. At first, the location seemed impossible. The island was surrounded by shallow, marshy waters, but the Aztecs were skilled engineers. They built bridges connecting the island to the mainland, canals for transportation, drainage systems and aqueducts that brought fresh water into the city. They also created chinampas, artificial farming islands made of soil and vegetation, which became incredibly fertile and allowed them to grow large amounts of food. Over time, Tenochtitlan became one of the greatest cities in the world. Through warfare and alliances, the Aztecs expanded their power and formed what became known as the Triple Alliance, dominating many surrounding cities. Conquered peoples were required to pay tribute in food, textiles, precious materials, and labor. The empire grew rapidly and came to rule over millions of peoples. But many conquered peoples deeply resented Aztec rule, forced to supply wealth and resources to sustain the empire. This resentment would later change the course of history. Life in Tenochtitlan impressed anyone who visited. The city had organized neighborhoods, schools, religious centers, gardens, and enormous marketplaces. The great market of Tlatelolco could gather tens of thousands of people daily. Food, clothing, tools, animals, and luxury goods were traded in an organized system. It was a thriving and orderly metropolis. Religion played a central role in Aztec life. They believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world and keep the sun moving. In return, humans had to offer energy and devotion to maintain cosmic balance. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Spain was becoming a powerful empire, funding expeditions to explore and conquer new lands in search of wealth. One ambitious explorer was Hernán Cortés. Hearing stories of rich civilizations inland, he organized an expedition and in 1519 sailed toward the Mexican coast with around 500 soldiers, a few horses, firearms, and cannons. Though small in number, they possessed military technology unknown in the region. Soon after arriving, Cortés discovered something crucial. Many local peoples were enemies of the Aztecs. He began forming alliances with tribes who wanted freedom from Aztec domination. Another key figure was Malintzin, known as La Malinche, an indigenous woman who became Cortés's interpreter and advisor, allowing communication and negotiation with local leaders. Without these alliances, the conquest might never have succeeded. As the Spanish marched inland, some cities resisted, while others allied themselves with them. Meanwhile, Aztec Emperor Montezuma II began receiving troubling reports about strange foreigners advancing towards his empire. Hoping to avoid conflict, Montezuma sent gifts to the newcomers, including gold. But the gesture had the opposite effect. The gold only increased Cortés's determination to reach the capital. In November 1519, something unimaginable happened. Cortés and his men entered Tenochtitlan and were welcomed by the emperor himself. The Spanishers were astonished. The city seemed larger and more organized than many European cities. Huge bridges, canals filled with canoes, crowded markets, and enormous temples surrounded them. But Cortés had not come merely to visit. He intended to take control. And soon, everything would spiral out of control. End of part 1.
When the Spanish entered Tenochtitlan, tension filled the air. At first, Cortés and his men were treated as honored guests. They were housed in a royal palace and allowed to explore the city. But Cortés quickly realized something. He and his soldiers were deep inside a massive city, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people. If the Aztecs decided to attack, none of them would leave alive. So Cortés made a bold and dangerous decision. He captured Emperor Montezuma. Using surprise and intimidation, the Spanish took the ruler hostage inside his own palace, forcing him to rule under their control. For months, the situation remained tense. Montezuma continued giving orders, but everyone knew he was now a prisoner. The people of Tenochtitlan grew increasingly angry. Meanwhile, Cortés received terrible news. A Spanish force sent from Cuba had arrived to arrest him for disobeying orders and launching the expedition without permission. Cortés was forced to leave the city with part of his army to confront this new threat, leaving his lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, in charge. And that decision changed everything. During a major religious festival, thousands of Aztec nobles and warriors gathered in a ceremonial plaza. Fearing a possible uprising, Alvarado ordered his soldiers to attack the crowd. Panic spread through the city. When Cortés returned, Tenochtitlan was already in open revolt. The population surrounded the palace where the Spanish were trapped. Supplies ran low, and escape seemed impossible. In desperation, Cortés forced Montezuma to speak to his people from a balcony, hoping to calm them. But the crowd no longer saw their emperor as a leader. To them, he had become a puppet of the invaders. Chaos erupted, and Montezuma was mortally wounded during the unrest. Soon after, he died. With the emperor gone, resistance only grew stronger. The Spanish now had one option: escape. On a rainy night in June 1520, Cortés and his forces tried to flee the city, carrying as much gold as they could. But the escape was discovered. Aztec warriors attacked from canoes and rooftops as the Spaniards attempted to cross the narrow bridges out of the city. Many soldiers, weighed down by stolen treasure, fell into the canals and drowned. It was a disastrous retreat, remembered as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Yet Cortés survived, and he was not finished. After escaping, Cortés began rebuilding his army. Thousands of indigenous allies joined him, eager to defeat the Aztecs once and for all. At the same time, an invisible enemy was spreading. A disease brought from Europe, smallpox, began sweeping through the population. The Aztecs had no immunity. Entire communities were devastated. Warriors, civilians, and leaders died in huge numbers. Even the new emperor fell victim to the epidemic. When Cortés returned months later, the empire was already weakened. In 1521, the Spanish and their indigenous allies surrounded Tenochtitlan, cutting off food and water supplies. Bridges were destroyed, and ships built by the Spanish controlled the lake, preventing escape or reinforcements. For months, fierce fighting took place throughout the city. Neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street, resistance slowly collapsed. Hunger and disease spread among the population. Still, many refused to surrender. The final Aztec ruler, Cuauhtémoc, led the last defense of the city, but by August 1521, Tenochtitlan could no longer resist. The once magnificent capital fell. Much of the city was destroyed during the siege. Temples and buildings were torn down, and on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, the Spanish began constructing a new colonial capital. Today, that city is known as Mexico City. The fall of Tenochtitlan marked the end of the Aztec Empire and the beginning of Spanish rule in the region for centuries. An empire that seemed eternal but vanished in a single generation. The empire that seemed eternal but vanished in a single generation.